Ladies and gentlemen, this lecture is one of the final events during the second Sigismundus Lauxmin International Harpsichord Contest. I would like to warmly congratulate the prize winners of this edition and extend thanks also to all the musicians who took part in the competition. One of the main aims of the contest is to promote the musical repertoire of our corner of the world, the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a unique connection of two neighboring countries, the Polish Crown and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. We draw on the musical sources that originated here in the 16th and 17th centuries to make their contents played, and my little lectures hopefully serve to understand them better, both as products of the local musical tradition and as part of the pan-European heritage. The present lecture will concentrate on the ways of playing keyboard instruments in three Jesuit colleges that functioned in the northeastern part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, specifically in Braunsberg, Kražiai and Riga. For the past few years, I have worked on the four preserved keyboard manuscripts that originated in those colleges between circa 1585 and 1620. Three of them have been published in the series Fontes Musicae in Polonia. The Kražiai manuscript appeared in a facsimile edition in 2017 with foreword by Laima Budzinauskiene and Raza Murauskaite. The Braunsberg Oliva tablatures appeared in 3 volumes in a modern edition by me in 2021, and also in the same year the Riga tablature appeared in a modern edition by Zofia Hankowska. Thanks to these editions, and of course the scholars who took the trouble to prepare them, we are now able to study the traditions of organ playing that are reflected in the Jesuit sources. It is a huge material that has already revealed a lot of new information, but also one that invites further research. Here I would like to concentrate on some aspects of the source's contents that could not be extensively treated in the introductions to the editions, their instrumental repertoire and its possible ways of transmission, as well as their functions. I would also like to place them in a broader perspective of various organ traditions that could influence their origins. That will hopefully help address the issue of how the organ and other keyboards were used and played in the Jesuit colleges in question. Let us first list the sources. The oldest manuscript that bears inside a single date 1585 is now held in Uppsala and will be referred to as Uppsala 89. I believe it originated in Braunsberg for reasons that I will shortly present. Next is the bigger of the two tablatures that I call Braunsberg Oliva tablatures. It was begun in Braunsberg in 1610 at the latest, and probably continued there for some years before its main scribe, Jacobus Apfel, moved to the Cistercian monastery at Oliva near Gdańsk. The Kražiai manuscript was probably produced mostly in a very short span of time, because the only date that appears scattered on 3 different pages is 1618. Both these sources are now kept in 2 libraries in Vilnius. The Riga tablature bears the date 1620 on the inside of its front cover, together with the inscription Quarta tabulatura Collegi Rigensis. This 4th tablature from Riga, of how many we do not know, is the only one that has been preserved and is now housed in Uppsala. The tablature Uppsala 89 does not bear any provenance inscriptions. It is also the only one of our 4 manuscripts that has no modern edition yet. It can be found in the RISM database, but there are only many incorrect titles and missing attributions. Recently, it has been possible to identify a lot of compositions that were written without attributions or even without any title inscriptions. The repertoire of Uppsala 89 that emerges from these findings is astonishingly diverse, both in terms of genres and provenance. Apart from Latin motets of Italian and German composers, there are French chansons, German lieder, and Italian madrigals, some of them evidently known as contrafacta with Latin texts. Many little-known pieces, or their arrangements, point to strong connections with Poland, Sweden, and Prussia. It is evident that the manuscript was produced somewhere in the region of Warmia, in German Ermland. But there are also specifically Jesuit traits. I have already pointed out that Uppsala 89 transmits 7 anonymous compositions that otherwise appear only in the Braunsberg Oliva tablature, precisely in its Braunsberg section. In each case, the musical text is closely related in both sources, but perhaps the most interesting case is the presence of 5 Laudi Spirituali in Uppsala 89. They were copied into the tablature directly from an Italian print issued in 1580 in Venice and stemming from the Jesuit tradition of the schools of Dottrina Christiana. The anonymous scribe of Uppsala 89 copied not only the first words of the Italian texts, but also notated numbers that refer to numbering of the Laudi in the print, and in 2 cases also the respective page numbers in the print. 2 of the Laudi, Dispost hodie seguirti and Jesu, 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 we see them as the first 2 compositions on folio 7 recto in Uppsala 89, reappear in the Braunsberg Oliva tablature. Their music is still exactly the same as in the Italian print, but the title inscriptions are different. Evidently, at some point between 1580 and 1610, these songs became so popular that it was decided to set German texts to them. Dispost hodie seguirti became Jesu, König der Ehren, and Jesu, Jesu, Jesu became Jesu von Leichnam schon. Both these German texts reappear also in the 1639 edition of the Braunsberg songbook, Himmlischer Harfenklang. The melody of Jesu von Leichnam schon is clearly derived from the Italian Lauda. We can now compare the cantus part of the 1580 print, the setting notated in the Braunsberg Oliva tablature, and the melody from the 1639 songbook from Braunsberg. This particular Italian print of Laudi Spirituali was probably not a very popular one. Now it exists in only 1 copy, and its anonymous songs were never reprinted in any of the countless similar publications. The tablature copies in Uppsala 89 are the only trace of its reception in this corner of Europe. It seems very likely that the transmission of the original print to Warmia was conducted by Jesuits, and the place of its destination, reception, and rearrangement was indeed the Braunsberg College. The 2 manuscripts from Braunsberg and 1 from Riga are written almost entirely in German letter tablature notation, the so-called New German tablature, that was commonly used in German-speaking areas from about 1550. The notation points to a connection with German organ tradition, and it proves not only a superficial one. Late 16th century tablatures from southern and central Germany, both printed and handwritten, are dominated by intabulations of vocal music. Only some of them contain relatively small group of instrumental compositions, mostly in polyphonic genres, that is, canzonas, fugas, and or fantasias, and sometimes also dances. Free preludes are rare and rather undeveloped. Much of the contrapuntal music was imported from Italy, whereas the short preludes seem to have been mostly local output. This general picture of tablatures from southern and central Germany coincides very well with the manuscripts from Braunsberg and Riga. They document, first of all, the art of intabulation of vocal music. The repertoire intabulated at the Jesuit colleges is very international and diverse, but, just as in the German organ sources, concentrated on polyphony. Both at Braunsberg and in Riga, vocal and instrumental forces provided by students were apparently rather strong. It seems that it was possible to perform quite complicated music written for up to a double choir. On the other hand, there is almost no trace of stile moderno based on basso continuo. In the German tradition, organists were attached to doubling vocal parts, especially the outer voices, and this is reflected in all intabulations that ranged from exact scores in tablature to reductions that show only the essential voices. The intabulations could be used in many different ways, both for accompaniments and in solo performance. One of the advantages of the tablature notation is therefore its open character that allows for adjusting to specific performance conditions. One may play on one manual only, or, when the texture invites it, on two, with or without pedal. Double the inner voices more or less exactly, or reduce them to a simpler texture. One may also use the written music as a basis for an improvised ornamented intabulation. Ornamented intabulations were also sometimes written out. Printed German tablatures by Elias Nikolaus Amerbach, Bernhard Schmid the Elder, and Jakob Peix contain a great number of them, and both the title pages and the prefaces make it clear that they were published as examples for students and unexperienced organists who were not able to improvise them. At least two of these prints were known in Prussia. The wording of the title page of Johannes Fischer tablature is modeled after Amersbach book of 1575. On both, we see the same or very similar text phrases in almost exactly the same order. Also, both Fischer and the Braunsberg Oliva tablatures contain one composition each, copied from the Bernhard Schmid book of 1577. It is possible that the printed tablature served as models or teaching tools for organists in Prussia. For example, whoever composed the ornamented intabulation of Lasso's Surrexit Pastor Bonus, that is preserved in the Braunsberg Oliva tablature, might have been inspired by Schmidt's setting. Here we see the beginning of the two settings. One is in F, the other one in G. One is edited on two staves, the other one in three. But it is only a different way of transcription from the tablatures. But apart from these superficial differences, we trace many very similar or even identical ornamentic figures in both intabulations. As we are dealing with the epoch of strong ties between composition, improvisation, and performance, it may be illuminating to find out that the only traces of teaching process in the tablatures from Braunsberg and Riga, apart from just playing the notated music, concern the art of intabulation. At the beginning of the Riga tablature, there are two short pieces, written both in mensural notation, that is, in notes, and in tablature. They show the process of transcribing the vocal parts into a tablature score, much like Girolamo di Ruta, in the second part of the treatise in Transilvano, shows how to transcribe individual lines of a score into the Italian intavolatura. In the Braunsberg Oliva tablature, the only page written in mensural notation is filled with exercises in transposition, a skill required of organists while playing motets notated in chiavette. Back to ornamenting intabulations. The florid examples from German prints and the few entries in the Jesuit tablatures that put diminutions in all the voices probably constitute the most advanced application of this art. It is likely that the way to this master stage went through putting ornaments on one or two voices only, or applying them at selected spots in the course of a composition. The ornamented intabulations in Uppsala 89 tend to favor the highest voice. That may also be a remnant of the earlier style connected with the old German tablature notation, in which the top voice was written in mensural notation and the lowest voices in letters. In the Braunsberg Oliva tablature, one can find examples of diminutions in the two outer voices, or only at selected individual spots, in one case even alongside a simple version that is also carefully notated. Such entries may reflect a diminution style that was relatively easy to emulate for less advanced students. Yet simpler level of decoration consisted in adding standard little ornaments at cadences. In the printed German tablatures, they are always written out in full, but in prefaces the authors clearly distinguished between Mordanten and Koloraturen, that means between small simple ornaments and longer, more artful diminutions. In several intabulations in Uppsala 89, otherwise not decorated, a special symbol is used for leading tone minims at some cadences. The symbol is known also from the Łowicz and Johannes Fischer tablatures, two keyboard sources from roughly the same time as Uppsala 89. And it's difficult to imagine what it could denote if not a cadential ornament, a Mordant in the German terminology of the time. Compared to the great number of intabulations, original instrumental music plays only a marginal role in the tablatures from Braunsberg. The Riga manuscript does not transmit it at all. We can only guess that instrumental music could have appeared in one of the missing tablatures from the set, and the same goes from ornamented intabulations, likewise missing from the Quarta Tabulatura. Uppsala 89 contains just two canzonas from Fiorenzo Maschera's collection of 1584. Oddly, Canzon Prima La Capriola appears in the tablature with the title Laudate, which implies that this music was sung with a psalm text. Canzon Vigesima has no title and attribution. This particular piece was quite popular. We find it also in two manuscript tablatures from Germany, always anonymous. It is therefore likely that Maschera's canzonas circulated in German-speaking areas without any knowledge about their actual composer. The same may be true about many other works, especially imported from Italy or France. The Braunsberg Oliva tablature transmits an important group of 68 dances and at least 21 other instrumental compositions. These numbers are still small when compared to intabulations, but certainly more substantial than those in Uppsala 89. Most of the dances probably come from a local tradition. Their notated textures range from outer voices to full 4 or 5-part texture, from very simple, sometimes even amateurish settings, to artfully ornamented compositions tailored for the keyboard. The other works include 6 of a prelude type and 12 contrapuntal pieces. They form a mixed repertoire. One part of it reflects the local output, with 2 preambula by Petrus de Drusina, 1 canzona and 1 fuga by Diomedes Cato, and probably other unidentified compositions. The other part consists of canzonas by Andrea and Giovanni Gabrieli, Costanzo Antoniati, Claudio Merulo, Hans Leo Hassler, and his brother Kaspar. These compositions do not reappear in any other keyboard sources in Central Europe, and thus seem to have been imported, most likely from Augsburg, perhaps together with the paper that was used for the tablature book. Hans Leo Hassler worked in Augsburg from 1585 to 1600, and as a pupil of Andrea Gabrieli, he certainly might have been responsible for bringing the Venetian keyboard repertoire to southern Germany. The Kražiai manuscript stands out in sharp relief against the 3 tablatures from Braunsberg and Riga. It was written entirely in staff notation, mostly in tavolatura, or Italian keyboard notation, with some compositions entered in score. Not surprisingly, its repertoire has completely different proportions than the repertoire of tablatures. It comes close to the preserved Italian organ books from the late 16th century, both printed and manuscript, that are concentrated on instrumental music, with only a small percentage of intabulations. In the Kražiai manuscript there are only 4 intabulations. Almost all other pieces in the manuscript are contrapuntal instrumental music, either free, the compositions are called ricercata or fantasia, or liturgical, mostly consisting of versets for the Mass or Magnificat. There are also short patterns of elaborated sequences, as well as short, chordal, extended cadences that are headed either incepta or pro finali. 2 sets of Mass versets are notated as basso continuo lines with some figuring, much like in Adriano Banchieri's L'organo suonarino. They are also organ versets that should be improvised on the bass lines and not accompaniments to vocal music, as is clear from the inscriptions chorus and organista that are located between the versets. These inscriptions refer to performing the Mass proper alternatim, that is, one verse was sung by the choir, probably in plainchant, and next was played on the organ. The versets notated as bass lines in the Kražiai manuscript are very unique in this part of Europe. They are completely different from Banchieri's, and yet they show that this peculiar Italian tradition was known also in Lithuania. This focus on instrumental music is confirmed by the first section of the manuscript, comprising some 30 folios. It is in fact a teaching manual filled with exercises and examples of counterpoint, imitation, basso continuo, transposition and diminution. I have talked extensively about this section in another lecture. Here we can draw from it 2 important conclusions. First, the emphasis is not on the art of intabulation and its ornamentation, but on counterpoint and basso continuo as a basis of organ improvisation. Second, precisely these skills were required of a church organist, especially in churches with no elaborate polyphonic vocal music, where short organ versets alternated with Gregorian chant. I think we should bear in mind here that the college in Kražiai was established only in 1616, just 2 years before 1618, the date we find in the manuscript. It looks as if there were at first very limited resources to perform vocal polyphony there, unlike in the older colleges at Braunsberg and in Riga. Instead, there was a need to train an organist whose task would be not so much accompanying the singers, but rather improvise versets according to the alternatim practice. From this point of view, the compositions that fill the manuscript could serve as master examples of contrapuntal music. Elaborated ricercars stand out as notated in score, perhaps intended to show clearly the art of imitative counterpoint. They include 2 compositions by Vincenzo Bertoluzzi and several pieces that have not been identified thus far. I was able to establish that the Ricercata Quarti Toni is in fact the Ricercar Secondo from a collection of Francesco Usper Sponga, issued in Venice in 1595. I have already pointed out that the composition titled Psalm Davida, David's Psalm, is an intabulation of a canzonetta by Hans Leo Hassler, and the composition that follows the Psalm Davida with no attribution and title is a canzona by Claudio Merulo. The Merulo work is an interesting case. It is known in an ornamented version from the Turin tablatures, but is also found in the Oxford part books that contain a set of fantasias by Diomedes Cato, in a fragmentary tablature preserved in Brasov, Romania, formerly Kronstadt, and in the extensive Vienna manuscript 14714. Its attribution comes from the Turin and Oxford sources, and it is likely that in a large part of Europe it circulated just as a popular anonymous composition. All these contrapuntal pieces notated in score appear in just one section of the Kražiai manuscript, a section that was clearly separate from the next sections before the book was bound. It seems that this score section transmits a set of pieces that could have circulated together before it was copied at the college in Kražiai. The style of these compositions, diverse in itself, is completely different from the keyboard style of the pieces written in intavolatura, including the ricercars and fantasias composed by Adam of Wągrowiec. The presence of a ricercar from the little-known collection by Francesco Usper is very surprising and reveals the existence of a special channel through which such a composition could have been transmitted to Lithuania. Perhaps it was Vincenzo Bertoluzzi who would serve as an intermediary. Bertoluzzi came to Poland most probably in 1595, when the Usper print appeared in Venice, and then served as a royal organist in Warsaw until 1607. His instrumental music was never issued in print, so the presence of his 2 compositions in the Kražiai manuscript is very telling. Apart from them, there is only one canzona by Bertoluzzi in a manuscript now kept in Vienna. One other piece from the Kražiai manuscript includes an unmistakable quote from Palestrina's famous madrigal Vestiva I Colli. The composition is called Łobzowskie and attributed to księdza, which is priests. The quote of the first point of imitation from Palestrina's madrigal appears in the second section of the piece, only modestly ornamented. The mystery of the piece's title and strange construction has yet to be solved, but the attribution points to Adam of Wągrowiec, who is mentioned many times in the manuscript in forms such as Księdza Jadama. In fact, the Kražiai manuscript has been famous so far mostly because it is the only source of Adam's keyboard music. Some of Adam's works call specifically for the use of the pedal, and not only for long notes, as in the Italian tradition, but also for an advanced obbligato line. This important detail links Adam's way of playing with the North European tradition that was cultivated, for instance, in Gdańsk. It is remarkable that two distinct traditions of organ playing coexisted in quite close vicinity during one decade. If we put aside the earliest source, Uppsala 89, the other three manuscripts were created between 1610 and 1620. The Braunsberg Oliva and Riga tablatures represent the German tradition, concentrated on intabulations and their ornamentation with a marginal role of instrumental repertoire. The Kražiai manuscript is Italianate in character, and instrumental music, including original keyboard works, plays a decisive role in it, as opposed to the very few intabulations. These two approaches to organ playing might have been connected with the teachers responsible for training the keyboard playing in the colleges. Unfortunately, we know nothing about them. The two traditions could also fit quite well to the different conditions of church music in the Jesuit colleges, well developed in Braunsberg and Riga, and slender in Kražiai. But they also testify that at the beginning of the 17th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was really at a crossroads of major European music styles that coexisted and influenced each other, also thanks to the growing Jesuit education.